It began with a whisper, on a cold February 24th in the year 1603. A deathbed confession, ripped from a dying woman's lips, tore through Richmond Palace and shattered the very soul of England's most powerful monarch. Catherine Howard, Countess of Nottingham, had served Queen Elizabeth for 45 loyal years. With her final, ragged breath, she clutched her queen's hand, revealing a secret carried for 2 long years. A hidden ring. A message of peace from the executed Earl of Essex, intercepted. A chance for mercy Elizabeth had never known existed. The Queen's reaction was visceral, immediate. She struck the dying woman, her voice a piercing shriek. "God may forgive you," Elizabeth screamed, "but I never will." This horrific moment marked the precipice. Not just the end of a reign that transformed England, but the beginning of a woman's final days, so undignified, so horrifying, those who witnessed it could barely record the truth. What happened to Elizabeth I in those last weeks reads like a Gothic nightmare. 45 years of absolute control would culminate in a queen dying on her feet, refusing to lie down for 4 straight days. Her iconic face, thick with toxic lead paint, would later crack under the embalmer's touch. Her body, so deteriorated, would burst open inside its coffin during the funeral procession. This is the untold story of the Virgin Queen's final nightmare, a hell of her own making. By February 1603, Elizabeth was already fragile, 69 years old, having outlived almost everyone she trusted. Catherine Howard's confession, however, was the blow that destroyed her. The French ambassador noted her rapid decline, deep melancholy with conceit of her own death. She began complaining of sudden infirmities. Her ladies watched helplessly as she sat for hours, staring vacantly, occasionally breaking into quiet tears. It wasn't just Catherine's betrayal haunting her. As her body weakened, the specters of her past flooded back. Sir Robert Carey witnessed the Queen, racked with guilt, weeping uncontrollably about Mary, Queen of Scots. 16 years had passed since Mary's execution. Yet Elizabeth cried, according to Carey, manifesting her innocence, that she never gave consent to the death of that queen. The immense guilt, suppressed for so long, now consumed her. Mary was not the only ghost. Elizabeth became fixated on Catherine Grey, another royal woman she had imprisoned until her death. Catherine's grandson, Edward Seymour, now circled, awaiting Elizabeth's demise to claim the throne. While Elizabeth's mind crumbled, her body staged its own horrifying revolt. The physical deterioration was nightmarish. By January, a simple cold had mutated into something far worse. Contemporary accounts spoke of a deflection in the throat, now believed to be quinsy, a severe peritonsillar abscess.
Imagine your throat swelling shut from the inside, filled with pus, making every swallow feel like broken glass. The Venetian ambassador reported, infected glands like almonds, swollen, painful, and oozing. This agonizing throat infection was just the beginning. Elizabeth's few remaining teeth were black, decaying stumps. Decades of sugar and mercury treatments had rotted them. Severe dental abscesses spread infection deep into her neck glands. She could not eat, barely drink. The pain was constant, excruciating. Then came a horrifying discovery. Her coronation ring, symbol of her marriage to England, worn continuously for 45 years, had literally grown into her flesh. Historian William Camden recorded this grotesque detail. The ring had so grown into her flesh that it could not be drawn off. Her finger had literally grown around it. They had to file through the gold as she watched, leaving a permanent groove in the bone. The cutting of the ring was not just physically painful, it was symbolically devastating. Camden noted it was a sad presage, as if it pretended that the marriage with her kingdom, contracted by the ring, would be dissolved. The quinsy was just one symptom of a body in total systemic failure. Dr. Lister, her physician, described other symptoms he was too frightened to record while she lived. Her urine turned dark brown, a sign of kidney failure, likely from decades of mercury and lead poisoning. Her legs were so swollen with edema that her shoes had to be cut off. The swelling extended to her abdomen, making breathing difficult. In her final week, she developed pneumonia. Witnesses described her breathing as a rattling gasp, with coughing fits that brought up blood-tinged sputum. Throat infection, pneumonia, and fluid in her lungs meant she was drowning in her own body fluids. Most disturbing were the neurological symptoms. Beyond memory loss and confusion, Elizabeth experienced fits. She would suddenly go rigid, eyes rolling back, body trembling violently. Modern physicians suggest these were seizures caused by lead poisoning reaching critical levels in her brain. The royal physicians tried everything. They attempted to bleed her, but she refused. They prepared poultices, but she wouldn't let them near her. Dr. Lister wrote she would not suffer any physical medicine, convinced the doctors were trying to poison her. In desperation, they tried to feed her broths through a tube, but her throat was too swollen. For the last 3 days, she consumed nothing but a few spoonfuls of sugared water. Yet, perhaps the most insidious killer was her daily ritual, makeup. For over 40 years, Elizabeth painted her face with Venetian ceruse, a lethal mixture of white lead and vinegar. Layers of this toxic paste were applied every morning to hide smallpox scars, to maintain an illusion of eternal youth. The lead seeped through her skin, accumulating, slowly poisoning her from the outside in. By 1603, the symptoms were undeniably horrifying. Her hair had fallen out in clumps, leaving her nearly bald. She wore elaborate wigs to conceal it. Her memory, once sharp enough to speak 6 languages, began to fail. She'd forget names, lose conversations mid-sentence, her brilliant mind dissolving. Modern toxicologists confirm classic signs of chronic lead poisoning: hair loss, cognitive decline, muscle weakness, abdominal pain. Some historians suggest it contributed to her psychological breakdown, with hallucinations and paranoia common. The makeup that protected her image had become her slow executioner. The cruel irony: the more lead damaged her skin, the more makeup she needed. A vicious, toxic cycle that only ended with death. The Venetian ceruse was only the beginning of Elizabeth's toxic beauty regime. To achieve the blood-red lips featured in every portrait, she used vermilion, a compound of mercuric sulfide. Mercury, absorbed through the delicate skin of the lips, caused neurological damage, kidney failure, and what physicians of the time called the shakes. Elizabeth's handwriting in her final years shows a telltale tremor, absent in her youth. For her eyes, she used belladonna drops to dilate her pupils, a fashion demanding large dark eyes. Belladonna literally translates to beautiful woman, but its other name, deadly nightshade, tells the real story. Regular use causes hallucinations, confusion, and severe vision problems. By 1603, Elizabeth could barely see, requiring state papers to be read aloud. Each night, to remove the lead makeup, she used a mixture of eggshells, alum, and mercury. Then, in the morning, before applying fresh lead, she'd first paint her face with egg whites to create a smooth base. Layer upon layer, day after day, year after year. One courtier, seeing her without makeup in 1602, was so shocked he wrote her face looked like parchment with great wrinkles. The skin was so damaged that when she smiled, the makeup cracked, requiring constant touch-ups. Ladies-in-waiting were tasked with following her, pots of fresh ceruse at the ready, to fill the cracks as they appeared. But nothing was more bizarre than what happened in early March 1603. Elizabeth developed an irrational, absolute terror of lying down. She became utterly convinced that if she went to bed, she would never rise again. This was not metaphor. She literally refused to lie down. For 15 straight hours, she stood in her chambers. 15 hours! Her ladies watched in horror as their 69-year-old queen, sick and dying, stood motionless like a statue carved from pain. When her legs finally gave out, she did not go to bed. She collapsed onto cushions her ladies had hastily spread on the floor, and there she stayed.
For 4 consecutive days and nights, Elizabeth sat on those cushions. She didn't speak. She refused all food. She refused all drink. She refused all medical treatment. Robert Carey described the scene. She sat with her finger in her mouth in complete silence, her eyes fixed on the floor. Her courtiers were beside themselves. Here was the Queen of England, sitting on floor cushions like a stubborn child, apparently willing herself to die rather than admit weakness by lying in a bed. The Secretary of State, Robert Cecil, tried to reason with her. When he suggested she must go to bed, Elizabeth snapped back with one of her last coherent statements. Must is not a word to use to princes. Finally, Charles Howard, the Earl of Nottingham, and her Lord Admiral had seen enough. On March 21st, he physically forced her to bed. Robert Carey's account is telling. What by fair means, what by force, he got her to bed. They had to physically carry the Queen of England to her bed, and once there, she never rose again. During those 4 days, when Elizabeth sat on her cushions, refusing to move, a careful watch was organized around her. Her ladies-in-waiting took shifts, never leaving her alone for a moment. Lady Warwick later wrote that the Queen would occasionally reach out and grab whoever was nearest, holding their hand with surprising strength, then release them without a word. Sometimes she would motion for a specific lady to come closer, stare into their eyes intently, then dismiss them with a wave. The Countess of Nottingham, not to be confused with Catherine Howard, who had died in February, tried to feed her. She would kneel beside the Queen with a silver bowl of broth, begging her to eat. Elizabeth would turn her head away like a stubborn child. Once, when the Countess persisted, Elizabeth suddenly grabbed the bowl and threw it across the room. It was the only violent outburst during those silent days. At night, the watching became even more critical. Elizabeth had developed a profound terror of being alone in the dark. Dozens of candles were kept burning at all times. When she dozed, still sitting upright on her cushions, her ladies would hold their breath, wondering if this was finally the end. But then her eyes would snap open, wild and frightened, searching the room as if she'd forgotten where she was. Lady Scrope recorded that on the 3rd night, Elizabeth began pointing at the corner of the room, following something with her eyes that no one else could see. She would shake her head violently, as if arguing with an invisible presence. Some whispered she was seeing the devil come to collect her soul. Others, more pragmatically, recognized the hallucinations of lead poisoning and fever. March 23, 1600. Elizabeth lay dying, and England held its breath.
For 45 years, she had adamantly refused to name an heir.
It was her ultimate power play, keeping everyone guessing, everyone dependent on her favor. But now, with her voice gone and consciousness fading, the Privy Council faced a dire crisis. They gathered around her bed. Robert Cecil leaned close and began listing possible successors. When he mentioned James VI of Scotland, something remarkable happened. According to Robert Carey, Elizabeth put her hand to her head when the King of Scots was named to succeed her. The council interpreted this as for making the sign of a crown, her silent consent for James to inherit. But here is the problem. Other witnesses in that very room claimed she made no gesture at all. Some insisted she was already unconscious. The crown gesture may have been a convenient fiction, a political cover for a decision the council had already made. The ambiguity was perfect for Cecil, who had been secretly corresponding with James for years, meticulously preparing for this exact moment. Whether Elizabeth actually chose James, or whether her council chose for her, remains one of history's enduring mysteries. While Elizabeth lay dying, Richmond Palace became a snake pit of conspiracy and opportunism. Robert Cecil was not the only one playing the succession game. The Earl of Northumberland had been stockpiling weapons. Lord Cobham was gathering supporters for Arbella Stuart's claim. Catholic nobles were meeting in secret, hoping against hope that Elizabeth's death might restore the old religion. But Cecil was 10 steps ahead of them all. He had been corresponding with James VI of Scotland since 1601, using a cipher code and a network of secret messengers. Every letter was a delicate dance. Cecil could not openly betray his dying queen, but he desperately needed to secure his position with her successor. On March 19th, as Elizabeth's condition worsened, Cecil took a calculated risk. He drafted a proclamation declaring James as king, dated it for the future, and had it ready to distribute the moment Elizabeth died. He stationed riders at every major road out of London. He placed guards at every port to prevent any rival claimant from escaping to raise foreign support. The dying queen, semi-conscious on her cushions, had no idea that her Secretary of State had already organized her successor's government. James already knew which English nobles would be in his Privy Council, who would be arrested, who would be rewarded. The transition was choreographed down to the minute. Sir Robert Carey, meanwhile, had his own audacious agenda. He had prepared 3 horses along the road to Scotland, stationed at strategic points. His sister, Lady Scrope, was at Elizabeth's bedside, not out of loyalty, but to ensure she could grab the sapphire ring the moment the Queen died. They had planned this for weeks. Carey would later boast that he made the 400-mile journey to Edinburgh in less than Badries, a record that would stand for decades. That evening, Archbishop John Whitgift was summoned. The 73-year-old archbishop found Elizabeth barely conscious, lying on her back, one hand under the covers, one exposed. What followed was extraordinary. Whitgift began to pray. He prayed for so long that his old knees grew weary, and he tried to leave. But Elizabeth, this woman who hadn't spoken in days, somehow made a sign for him to continue. He prayed for another half hour, what witnesses called earnest cries to God for her soul's health, which he uttered with that fervency of spirit as the Queen, to all our sight, much rejoiced thereat. She fell into a deep sleep. Between 2 and 3 o'clock in the morning on March 24, 1603, Elizabeth Tudor died. The witnesses described it poetically, mildly like a lamb, easily like a ripe apple from the tree. The Virgin Queen was dead, but her body's final horror was yet to come. The moment Elizabeth died at 3 o'clock in the morning on March 24th, the machinery of succession kicked into motion with almost unseemly haste. Lady Scrope didn't even wait for the body to grow cold. She wrenched the sapphire ring from Elizabeth's finger, the flesh was still warm, and dropped it from a window to her brother, Robert Carey, waiting below. He was in the saddle and galloping north before the death bells even rang. Carey's ride to Scotland was legendary in its ambition and execution. The first horse was waiting at Doncaster. He rode it so hard that it collapsed just past York. The second horse got him to the Scottish border, where he fell during a river crossing and was kicked in the head, opening a bloody gash. Local border raiders, seeing a wealthy Englishman alone and injured, tried to rob him. He fought them off and continued riding. He reached Holyrood Palace in Edinburgh on the evening of March 26th, covering nearly 400 miles in just 60 hours. When he arrived, caked in mud and blood, King James was already in bed. Carey insisted on being admitted immediately. He knelt by the king's bedside and hailed him as King of England, presenting the sapphire ring as proof. James, who had been waiting for this moment for years, played it cool. He questioned Carey closely about the circumstances of Elizabeth's death, the mood in London, the disposition of the English nobles. Only when satisfied did he reward Carey with a position as a gentleman of the bedchamber. Though Cecil would later reduce this reward, angry that Carey had acted without official sanction. Elizabeth had been explicit. She did not want to be disemboweled after death. The idea of her body being cut open, her organs removed, horrified her. She gave clear instructions that this was not to happen. Robert Cecil ignored her wishes completely. Her internal organs were removed, her body was embalmed, and she was sealed in a lead-lined coffin. For over a month, her body lay in state while funeral preparations were made. Then, during the funeral procession to Westminster Abbey on April 28th, it happened. Attendants heard a loud crack from inside the coffin. The decomposition gases that had built up inside the sealed lead coffin had nowhere to go. The pressure built and built until finally the body exploded. Some accounts describe it as sounding like a cannon shot. The putrefaction had literally burst the corpse open inside its metal prison. The attendants, horrified, continued the procession. What else could they do? They carried a coffin containing the exploded remains of England's greatest queen through the streets of London while thousands of mourners wept, completely unaware of the grotesque reality inside the lead box. The funeral on April 28th was a production worthy of Hollywood, masking the horror of what lay in the coffin. Over 1,600 official mourners processed through London. The streets were draped in black cloth. Every church bell in the city tolled in unison. The procession stretched for over a mile, taking 4 hours to pass any given point. The coffin itself was a masterpiece of deception. Covered in purple velvet and cloth of gold, it bore the crown, orb, and scepter. But the real genius was the effigy on top. Modeled by Maximilian Colt, it was so lifelike that people gasped when they saw it. The face was painted with the same white lead Elizabeth had worn in life. The red hair, which Elizabeth had lost years ago, was a wig made from silk. The hands, carved in wood, wore exact replicas of her rings. The effigy wore a crimson velvet robe with an ermine collar, the same one Elizabeth had worn to her last parliament. Every detail was perfect, down to the jeweled buttons. It was Elizabeth as she wanted to be remembered, not the bald, toothless, lead-poisoned creature who had actually died. John Stowe, the chronicler, recorded that when the procession reached Westminster, there was such a general sighing, groaning, and weeping as the like hath not been seen or known in the memory of man. But he also noted something strange. Many of the tears seemed forced. The professional mourners, paid to wail and beat their breasts, were merely going through the motions. Behind the pageantry, there was relief. The old queen was dead. The succession had passed peacefully. England had a king again, a king with a wife and children, ensuring the succession for another generation. Some courtiers could barely contain their excitement about the new reign. When embalmers had prepared Elizabeth's body, they found a woman unrecognizable from her portraits. The white lead makeup was so thick it had formed a cracked shell over her face. When they tried to clean it, it came off in sheets, revealing damaged, discolored skin beneath. Most of her hair was gone. Her teeth were black stumps or entirely missing. This was the reality beneath the illusion. The Virgin Queen revealed as a poisoned, deteriorated shell of her former self. She was initially interred in her grandfather Henry VIII's vault, but even in death, Elizabeth couldn't rest. In 1606, James I had her moved to share a tomb with her half-sister Mary I, the very sister Elizabeth had lived in terror of, the Catholic queen whose throne Elizabeth had taken. The inscription reads, "Partners in throne and grave, here we sleep, Elizabeth and Mary, sisters in the hope of resurrection." The irony would have infuriated Elizabeth. After a lifetime of keeping Mary's memory suppressed, she now shares eternity with her. In the days immediately following Elizabeth's death, Richmond Palace became a monument to absence. Her private chambers were sealed on Cecil's orders, but servants later reported strange incidents. The Queen's favorite little dog, a spaniel, refused to leave her room. It sat by her empty bed, howling mournfully for days until someone finally removed it by force. It died within a week, having refused all food. Her collection of over 3,000 dresses was catalogued for distribution. Each gown was a work of art, cloth of gold, silver tissue, velvets embroidered with pearls and gems. But when the wardrobe mistresses opened them, they found many were rotting from the inside out. The lead from her makeup had transferred to the fabric, eating through silk and velvet like acid. Dresses worth fortunes crumbled at a touch. Her cosmetics table was left exactly as it was the morning she died. Pots of ceruse half-used, the vermilion for her lips, the belladonna drops, the tools of her transformation, brushes, sponges, cloths stained white with lead. Cecil ordered everything burned, but not before one courtier recorded that the smell from the cosmetics was most foul and pestilent. The throne room at Richmond stood empty for 3 days after her death. No one was quite sure what to do with it. Should they wait for James? Should they remove Elizabeth's coat of arms? In the end, it was decided to leave everything exactly as it was until the new king arrived. When James finally entered the throne room in May, he reportedly recoiled at Elizabeth's portrait hanging behind the throne. He ordered it removed immediately and replaced with his own. The greatest queen in English history was already being erased, her image packed away into storage like the woman herself had been packed into lead and buried. Elizabeth I's death was a masterclass in the price of absolute power. Every decision she'd made to maintain control, the toxic makeup, the refusal to name an heir, the isolation from human affection, came back to destroy her in the end. The lead that gave her the face of a queen slowly poisoned her mind and body. Her refusal to show weakness left her dying on floor cushions, too proud to lie in a bed. The bodies she'd ordered broken, Mary, Queen of Scots, Catherine Bray, haunted her final consciousness with a guilt that 16 years couldn't erase. She died as she had lived, alone, defiant, and desperately trying to control an image that had already cracked beyond repair. The explosion of her corpse in its coffin feels almost metaphorical, the final violent rejection of the imprisonment she had placed on herself. Elizabeth gave everything to be queen. In the end, that crown cost her everything that makes us human. She died not as a woman, but as a grotesque monument to her own power. Painted, poisoned, and ultimately alone. The Virgin Queen got her wish. She remained married only to England. But England, like all kingdoms, is a cold bedfellow in the dark hours before dawn, when even queens must face their mortality with nothing but their ghosts for company. So, what lessons do we draw from this macabre end? Perhaps it's a stark reminder that the pursuit of perfection, or rather, the illusion of it, can have deadly consequences. True beauty and power, history whispers, might lie not in outward adornment or ruthless control, but in the embrace of humanity, flaws and all. And for all her legendary reign, Elizabeth's tragic final act serves as a chilling testament to the often hidden and sometimes explosive cost of wearing the crown.